Good morning, we're back on S6, act relating to interrogation practices. And I think where we're at is the major issue, and 4 of us have indicated support for age 22 as being cut off. And let's
Wonderful. Thank you. So 63% of the 397 cases that were wrongfully convicted, including a false confession, happened to people under the age of 25. That includes 39% of the total 100% between the ages of 18 and 25. Those under 18 make up 28% of the total false confessions, and those from 25 and older make up 36%. So I think when we're looking at the numbers, the vast majority of people that are being harmed by these false confessions because of deceptive practices are actually between the ages of 18 and 25. So that, like I said, my pitch is really for everyone, but I feel like if we're going to limit it, we should really follow the brain science and the numbers here.
Well, I'm comfortable at 22 because that's the youthful offender age. Already determined that somebody 22 and under can be eligible for youthful offender status in Vermont, which allows for a family court to be involved. And I think, you know, I don't know that I'll be here 3 years from now, but I would guess that there will be a push to increase the age, just as there is in Connecticut and other states. But I think for me, I don't even know, what will happen to the bill if it gets to the floor, what happens to the bill when it gets to the other body, and then with the governor. But to me, if this passes, it's a step in the right direction. And if people find no problems with it, which I expect they will, then I think that law enforcement, state attorneys, and others would be more amenable to increasing the age beyond 22. We would be the first state, I think, to go to 22. So we'd be the highest age. That's my argument for 22.
Can I ask a question? And I think it's probably a question that is both for Ben and for the committee. Rather than explicitly saying 22, can we link it to youthful offender? So if that age raises, we don't have to revisit this and raise it again.
But then we'd be, instead of going to 22 now, we'd be staying with 18, and then this was raised with that. I would rather go to 22 now.
But my understanding from what the chair just said is that the youthful offender statute now is at 22, which is why he feels comfortable with 22.
No, I think we're talking about 2 different things. Raise the age.
And youthful offender is different. You have raised the age would be 19.
That's what I'm saying. So
right, so I'm wanting to link it to youthful offender, which is now at 22. But if next year we raise that age to 25, this would automatically raise.
Our expert on youthful offender is Erica Mathage and Marshall Hall. So one of them's here.
And everything that was just said is correct. So I don't actually have to correct anything. Youthful offender goes to age 22, and raise the age currently goes up to age 19.
Yeah. So an argument for 22, but with an automatic linkage that if
youthful offender is raised, this is automatically raised.
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
I don't anticipate that happening right away.
I was going to say, is that in the crystal ball here or something? Region of.
I mean, maybe now.
I think there may be an attempt to provide services beyond age 22.
I have not heard of anybody talking about raising the age of youthful offender beyond age 22 for years. There's never been a bill drafted, and I don't anticipate it for. I mean, honestly, someday I would like to see it go to 25 or 26 because that matches the brain science, but nobody's suggested it. Nobody's made a bill about it. We don't anticipate
We could say
suggesting it at a time.
22 or youthful offender status, whichever is higher.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't agree with that.
Really?
I can't agree with that one without discussion on as to where between 22 and 25 as to why we're going to go. Just follow this as an automatic.
Yeah.
We could adjust, but I want to The only thing that passed the Senate out of this committee a few years ago, and I don't know what happened to it. I think it died in the House. But it was ordering the corrections department to separate those 25 and under in their population and not allow them in the same facilities. And I think corrections might have had a problem with it after they thought about it, but that's the only thing that I'm familiar with that it wouldn't have been youthful offender because those 23 to 25, but there was all the evidence that we just talked about, the brain science and so forth. That it was also, frankly, I'd seen in prisons where those under 25 were behaving in such ways that were making it difficult for some of the older folk to do their time. And, but I don't remember ever a discussion about raising youthful offender beyond the 22.
If that's the case, then I suppose to echo what the chair said, I view this bill as right now as kind of interim step. It would make our age the highest in the nation, but I think given the committee's discussion in the coming years, there's going to be a discussion about extending it further. So taking Senator Norris's point, I don't know that we need to link it to anything. We could say 22 now with the understanding that we might revisit later and look at a higher date.
So, I guess 22.
Okay, keep it, so make it 22.
And I thank all of you. I realize to compromise on both sides.
And then as far as agent language, I don't know if there was really any consensus on it.
I think census was the English professor knows English. He knows the definition of agent.
I just, I'm just reacting to the fact that we're at the very end of markup. We didn't really ask anybody about the agent language, and it does seem to me to be potentially very wide ranging. So just speaking for myself, I would prefer that we stay with the definition of the draft, but happy to.
Nathaniel Erb from the Innocence Project has a comment or question.
Thank you, Senator, for the record, Nathaniel Erb from the Innocence Project. If I could provide some context, that'd be helpful. We support either way the committee moves in this direction, because I know it's a last minute consideration. I came up with the word agent after the committee had discussed resource officers and other folks. That's a word a term of art that's been used by other states in their recording of interrogation statutes to capture those other persons. Unfortunately, I didn't find this before the meeting today, but during your break, I pulled from the Uniform Law Commission. So in 2010, the Uniform Law Commission nationally adopted a model policy on recording interrogations. They actually chose, instead of using the word agent, the way they capture it is a law enforcement officer means a law enforcement officer or an individual acting at the request or direction of a law enforcement officer. So rather than just using the term of art of agent and then having the courts determine who would be an agent, they just explicitly state that it's anyone who's acting at the direction or request of the officer. So it has to be that, and kind of you go talk to the kid, you go interrogate the kid, whatever may be happening. That's how they captured it. That might be a better alternative. I think captures what Mr. Thompson was raising, as well as some other ideas of what was being discussed. But wanted to offer that if that's helpful. Apologize, I can't hear.
It's not just you.
Or direction of a law enforcement officer.
That included dispatcher, for example, who got the call, the 911 call, and then.
I mean, if,
It would have to be during the custodial.
yeah,
Interrogation.
and
It had to be during the interrogation.
yes.
Yeah.
My question around the language of acting at the request or direction of is that would an MOU with
I think you could use both.
No, I mean,
in what
if
current-
we're talking, I mean, I prefer agent to either of them, but if we're talking between the language in the bill or the language that was proposed of directed to, then I prefer the language in the bill.
Before, if I'm not mistaken, we could do both. In other words, cover your school resource officer the way that Ben drafted it in 1.1, and add the language that Nathaniel just suggested to cover other people who might be involved. Because your concern is schools. If that's, is that doable?
That's fine with me. I was only going to add that, I think I do the MOU issue a little differently. I would have no problem. Whether there was an MOU or not would not really concern me as a defense attorney. If I was in one of these cases trying to get one of these statements excluded, for me, it would just matter what actually happened in the room on the ground. If I could make even a half of a case that whoever was in the room with the police officer or whoever was in the room was acting at the direction or request of the police officer, I would make it. Now, I don't think the MOU would ever really factor into it.
So my concerns with changing this around, still has to do with the crossover of non-law enforcement working with law enforcement and the expectation of knowledge and training for somebody else who's joining an interview with a police officer. The example I'm thinking of is, the cop going into a school to interview a kid and, saying to the principal or another teacher, hey, can you join this interview with me just so at least there's another person in the room and just, so we have a group conversation. That person is acting at the direction of the officer. But are they also going to have the same understanding that that officer had through their training that is going to be developed by the Criminal Justice Council in response to this bill? Or is it, what sort of understanding is this other person, this other non-law enforcement person going to need to have in order to make sure the interview is done correctly? I guess that's my concern. I don't really have a question, I'm just throwing it out there.
But I think what we're talking about is whether the statement could be used in court. So there wouldn't be any liability for the person that you're talking about who's brought in. There's no criminal liability or whatever. So what if they didn't have the proper training and the law enforcement officer brought them in? They're just weakening their own chance to use the statement. So I don't worry about it. I guess I just worry about the word agent as a term that we haven't run by, suggested by the Innocence Project, and then the other witnesses didn't really react to that. So what the chair was suggesting, which was the language in 1 that includes school resource officers, means a person certified as a law enforcement officer pursuant to blah, 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 and a school resource officer or safety officer, and someone acting at their request or direction. That seems pretty specific to me, and I can get that. So I guess I would prefer that seems like there are 3 things we're considering. One is this, one is this plus agent, and one is just replaced school or resource officer and safety officer replaced by agent or the other language. So I would go with page 2 as it stands with the addition of or a person acting at the request or direction.
I would also support that.
Yeah.
The only clarity part about that, Senator Bruce, is if we add the language that Ben just showed me. I think that pretty much takes into consideration school resource officer and or safety officer. If they're asked to be there, okay, that covers them. So if we add this the way that it is now, if we add this in there, it's basically, my interpretation would be the school resource officer and or safety officer when it did an interview of their own, and then went to the law enforcement officer with that information. And then there might be another joint interview or interrogation, as we call it. I hate to call interrogation on youthful offenders, but interview is the term I would use. But doesn't that language cover everybody that we're considering here?
I think so. What I'm gonna suggest is that Ben draft the language that we just talked about, highlight it in your draft and send it out to all the people that are here. It's either the committee as well as all the people that are here, Zoom or otherwise, elicit comments and then come back to this next week when we do our final markup and vote on the bill. I don't know which day yet, but it gives everybody time to look at the draft. And if there's other areas where they suggest changes, they'll have a look at what's almost the final draft, but leaving that highlighted section will still be decided. If it looks clunky, once I think there's good points on both sides. I don't want it as unintended consequences. If this became law, I'd find something. So I think we've got enough experts here that can take a look at it.
And I can easily do that.
But I think overall the bill looks really good. And I think, the witness testimony all pointed toward removing the psychological, but what's there still protects some of what we were looking to protect under that term. So I think it's
It's a brand new committee. And I really appreciate everybody pitching in, all the usual suspects.
So did we go with the knowing, Senator? Did we cover the knowing portion of that already?
Yeah, it's going to be added at each clause.
That suggested the innocence project.
Great.
I just have a question. Does the council have any obligation in this bill to tell us what the model policy is, or can they just do whatever they like?
We would be able to just pull it off their website. I believe they have all their model policies posted up there.
Okay, and if the model policy is not something that is necessarily, and I don't think the Criminal Justice Council would do this, but if their model policy is like, keep using read, can we do anything about that?
The Criminal Justice Training Council hasn't been the problem. The problem's been some local police departments that haven't followed.
Right. Like I said, I don't think that they would. I just want to think out into the future. Could we get to a place where that could be what happens and what?
Yeah, I think it said, we'll say they shall develop, right?
Yeah, and it does say that, and the structure of that portion was modeled after the body cam statewide
Okay.
policy. So, but to your point, there's nothing that says that the council has to essentially vet their model policy through the legislature. That does not exist. It just gives them the mandate to create it, and then the mandate of all the law enforcement agencies under their purview to implement it once it's created.
Okay.
Now, it does enumerate in that certain scenarios that need to be outlined in the policy itself, but it doesn't, again, get into the specifics having to be approved by the legislature.
Okay, and that's fine. I remember some of the body cam conversations and use of force conversations, sort of like, go develop it, let's come back and talk about it, and I just wasn't sure if that was in this bill as well. So, thank you for explaining.
And we did have a lot of trouble with body cam and training. That, was not happening.
Sure as they did down in Memphis too.
Yeah.
And there is a provision in this that does mandate that whatever policy they create is incorporated into their as well.
And we were gonna add the language Senator Baruth suggested about some sort of way of holding local law enforcement accountable to that policy.
The grants,
Okay.
yeah, they have to do it that way.
By Memphis, I meant the reports that two of the officers didn't have their body cams on,
Right.
and one malfunctioned.
Yeah. No, it's always the case, malfunction. It happens.
It does. But out of 5, I'll be good.
video from 2 or 3 there, so we've captured everything we need to capture. And the scientific world isn't perfect. Every now and then, batteries low something. But I'm a little slack, not a whole lot slack, but just on the camera portion.
All right, well, tomorrow morning, we're at the pavilion. We're at what room, Peggy?
Room 267.
You'll need to take your pass through to get down to the thing. We're starting at 9. We've got a meeting with health board there. And we've got a lot of people in the emergency room. We're talking about violence in emergency rooms, which I believe is a problem that and actually all over the country. I think we're